Winning against someone rated 2000, especially 2000 FIDE, is very difficult. After watching this video, you will have a clear view of how you can actually try to outplay these rather strong players. I will give you a real-life example from my over-the-board play. White starts the game with first e4, black plays d6, a very flexible setup, d4, knight to f6. Now this pawn here is attacked. White wants to defend this, has various ways. Knight to c3 is one. Another is pawn f3. Another one is bishop d3. But let's continue with the game, because after knight c3, black has a couple of moves to play here. So black has a wide choice, such as g6, a6, c6, or the game move e5. Black is offering the trade of queens. And black is even offering white to destroy the right of castling for black. Black cannot castle in this position. However, the queens are off the board, so the chances of white checkmating black are lowered now. And this endgame is considered to be more or less equal, with some chances for white. But also white needs to watch out, because he might get into a very bad position early on if he allows black to play his game. So let's continue with the game. Knight to f3 was played. This is again the main line, and this is putting pressure on the e-pawn. Now, black has a choice. Black can defend the pawn with the piece, with knight to d7, or black can take on d4. The reason why I dislike taking on d4 is because we trade our e-pawn for a d-pawn, and then the knight gets to d4. If we had traded a c-pawn for the d-pawn, then I would say, okay, at least we got the central pawn for the active knight. But no, here it is still playable, but nothing I want to get. So knight to d7. Now follow bishop e3, the first surprise. White has several moves here, such as the Shirov gambit, g4, with a very sharp game, or the absolute main line here, bishop to c4. However, white decides to go bishop e3, and black responds bishop to e7. Now white wants to gain control over the g4 square, a very important square in these positions, so therefore plays pawn to h3. At first sight, this just looks like a loss of time. However, in these positions, h3 is an absolutely normal move. We will see why in a moment. So I played c6, and the reason is the following. Now white could play pawn to g4, try to attack on the king side. And this is something I like to play myself with the white pieces if black is playing the Philidor, like here. So I have always a lot of respect of these setups and try to maintain the king in the center as long as possible. But now let's go back to the game. White understandably wanted to prevent pawn to b5 and played a4. A very standard move in such situations. Now black castled, and bishop to c4 was played. Now black has a dilemma. Black can equalize immediately by playing knight takes e4. This just looks like a sacrifice, but actually black just gains everything back after d5. This is a fork, which white cannot escape. And the position is more or less equal. However, this had simplified the position, and to be honest, I wanted to win against this opponent, so I played the rather risky move a5. Not the most correct move, but the one you play if you want to play for a win. Now d5 was played, and also this is a very standard move in such positions. Despite the fact that the pawns in the center are all on white, the white squared bishop isn't that bad, because the center might open any time, and then the white squared bishop is usually strong. So now I played knight to b6, and a standard move such as bishop b3 would guarantee white a slight advantage. However, in the game, my opponent played queen to d3, and this is activating the queen, that's right, and it's developing the queen, and white is closer to getting his rooks connected. But you cannot always focus on tempo, because in this position, it's about maintaining your strong piece, which is the light squared bishop. So here, after knight takes c4, black would already enjoy an advantage. In the game, I thought for a long time here and decided to take on d5 first. And this is slightly inaccurate because now bishop takes b6, queen takes b6, and some portion of the advantage of black is gone, or the position is completely equal here. But I thought this position is still not so pleasant for white, so why not? However, in the game, my opponent immediately took on d5, not first taking on b6, and we will see why this is not so good. Now, we must check the forcing moves, so let's set up our candidate moves. One is knight takes d5, the other is knight takes d5. So for one, we can play knight f, so we take with this knight, or we take with the b knight. The question is, how do we decide which move to play? And here we will go a little bit deeper into the decision-making process. Now here I thought I just take, then, well, white has two ways of regaining the knight, which is e takes d5. And now I had the feeling this knight on f6 is somehow in the way, and taking with the b knight is nice, but I like this position, but I would be forced to move the knight here, so later on I can play something like pawn f5. Therefore, we also look into the other move, knight f takes d5. And here we see, okay, after a move such as e takes d5, we can play pawn f5 immediately, and now we are threatening a fork, so the move pawn f5 comes for free for us, for black. Why? We are threatening to win material. White must react here. And we also gain a lot of space on the king's side. Now let's go back. In the game, knight takes d5 was played, and now I decided to take with the knight. And here, obviously taking with the pawn again is bad because of f5, and now this threat is strong. Again, a very unpleasant position. And also pushing the f-pawn might be an option. So here, therefore, queen takes d5 was played, and now we need to talk about something very important here. It looks like the queen is attacking or putting some pressure on b7. But this is just on the surface. Why? Capturing on b7 might be a very risky move. And the reason is the following. White will only be able to capture on b7 if this bishop here moves. Let's say we play something like bishop e6. The queen takes, and our rook to b8. The queen has two squares to go to. One is queen a6, and the other is queen a7. Let's assume white plays queen a7. Then comes f5. We ignore the b pawn for the moment here. And why? Let's assume that white just takes on f5. Then we can recapture with the bishop. And now you see that black, if he wants, is going to win back the material and also be more active. So therefore, this would be a bad choice. And in these positions, where black is enjoying the pair of bishops, white should really not try to open up the center, because the pair of bishops are strong with an open center, and when there are pawns on both sides, like in this position. There are pawns on the king side, here, and there are pawns on the queen side, here. Oops, sorry. And the pair of bishops is usually strong in these structures because the bishop just puts so much pressure. They can attack on both wings, while a knight cannot do that. So bishop e6 was indeed played, and here my opponent decided not to take on b7. He went back to d2, and I believe bishop e6 came as a surprise to him, and then he figured out he shouldn't take, because that would be bad. Now the question is, what should black play? And if we take a deeper look, we might be tempted to play something like h6, just in case white tries to go knight g5 and attack our bishop. And we just make sure that it is safe. However, there is no need for fearing knight g5. And now let's just continue our development. So queen to c7. And now knight to g5 was played indeed, and our bishop is attacked. Here I missed a very strong move, which is bishop to c4. And here the bishop isn't just very active, it is preventing white from casting kingside, and it is controlling a lot of squares in the white camp. Look at e3, e2, f1, and it might also just go back to a6 and promote something like b5, support b5. I played a little bit less active. I played bishop to d7, and I would consider this a mistake, to be honest. At least it's a very big inaccuracy. Still, black has an advantage, and a rather big one. Now, to my surprise, white played pawn h4, and this move is usually intending that white wants to attack on the king side. Why? White still has his rook on h1, so opening the h file might not be the interest of black, and in some cases it's even worth sacrificing an entire piece, such as the knight here. The question is what black should do, and I was thinking, okay, what if I just ignore that knight on g5? It's sitting there, and well, white is not really able to come up with some threats. And then I was thinking, okay, if knight g5 is ignorable, what am I supposed to do? I would love to play a rook to c8, but the question is which rook, because whichever rook I put there, it will block the other rook. So I tried to think about the position, and then I was reminded, okay, I don't need to put a rook on c8 immediately. I can also try to develop the rooks differently. And here, black has already played a5. So rook to a6 looks very interesting here. And just look at this rook. It's not only going to c6 when it's convenient, it's also controlling, or to some extent, it's controlling the 6th rank. So just in case white tries to attack, I would need to play d5, pawn to d5, and the rook would control the entire rank. So rook a6 has also some defensive intentions. However, I played it firstly because I thought the rook on c6 will be much stronger than on c8, where it would block the other rook. My opponent played pawn to c3, a very understandable move. White wants to control the white squares and will most likely play queen d1 or queen c2 and then queen b3. This might be an idea. And from c2, it's also controlling this pawn. So I play rook to c6, and this move just looks a little bit stupid in my opinion. It's just a very mechanic, but it is a good move. Now queen to c2 was played, and now I was very optimistic that kicking the knight on g5 will not have any consequences for me, so why not just do it? I play h6. White could try to play something like queen to e2, and if I take here, try to gain some counterplay on the king side for the piece. It's probably not good, but black would be forced to find the following move: g6 to prevent the queen from entering. But then there's also queen f3 and queen h3, and here again, black is absolutely fine. Black is winning. Black just needs to find a move such as king g7, for example, and there are not too many threats in this position because the queen cannot enter h3 in this very moment, so would be forced to play something like g4. And then I have more than enough time to play queen d8, and now my rook on h8 would be defended. So let's say queen to h3 here, and simply rook h8. We exchange at least the rook. Each side exchanges the rook at least, and this position should be more than winning for me. More than fine for me, completely winning. Now let's go back. So this was a fear of mine, but I don't need to take the knight on g5. I was fearing that white would gain a lot of counter here. However, white just dropped back with his knight. Now I played bishop to e6. Why bishop e6 now? Well, the knight cannot enter g5 anymore, and the bishop needs to be improved anyway. Minor pieces, you want to enter the game a little bit earlier than the heavy pieces, or major pieces such as the rooks and queens. It becomes clear that black has so much control over the center, and the only piece that is really controlling the center for white, is the knight on f3. It's attacking the e5 pawn, which is defended. And we will see that white is already in big danger here. White played knight to d2, trying to reroute his knight to wherever, or trying to defend the e4 pawn another time. Now the question is, how can black advance? How is black supposed to improve his position? Because now the only piece that is still not well placed is maybe the rook on f8, so we could play something like rook c8. But here I had something very different in mind. Here I want to attack in the center, put a lot of pressure on white center. So I play f5. And in this position, it becomes clear why I wanted my rook to stay on f8. So it would help to advance the f-pawn, because now the rook is providing additional coverage to the f5 pawn. Here, it's very difficult to come up with some good advice for the white player, because here, in these positions, it is black who is much better here. However, in the game, I didn't want the queen to enter b3, if I remember correctly, so my go-to move here was rook takes f5, and then just, in worst case, I go back with my rook, and my position is very good. I have gained, or at least I've removed the only pawn of white from the center, the only central pawn of white. Instead, in the game, pawn to f3 followed. A very solid move, it seems. However, black can still put more pressure on white center, so I play pawn to d5. Now, white is in big trouble. The question is, what is he going to do? And just if white castles queenside, then there's always d4, which is completely crushing, because now the c-pawn is going to fall. And castling kingside isn't possible because of some hanging pawns here, for example, after playing d4, for example. So we can either play d4 or take on h4, I believe. These moves are just horribly difficult to meet by white. So white decided to take on d5. I took back with my bishop, obviously, and again the rook is covering the f5 pawn, so the rook on f8 is really a nice piece here. Now h5 was played, and maybe the intention of white was to gain control over g6, and he was probably dreaming of getting his knight somehow over to h4. But this will be a very long journey, and black doesn't need to be frightened here at all. Now, let's evaluate the position here. White's king is in the center. White has no good center here, or almost no control over the center. Castling in both directions looks very dangerous. So the obvious plan here is to break open the center, because then the king would be really in danger. So pawn to e4. Here white decides to take once. Why not twice? Well, if the knight takes now and white gains a pawn, then comes, for example, rook e6, and white is already losing material because the king is on the e-file, the bishop is on the e-file, and the knight is on the e-file. If the knight moves, we take the bishop. If the knight doesn't move, we take the knight. For example, castling, and now, for example, bishop takes e4, and black is completely winning here. Now let's go back. In the game here, white only took once, as mentioned, and then castled, and still, this position is also very dangerous. I played my rook to c8, trying, this is just in an attempt to show that I am attacking the opponent's king here. Or, yeah, the weak king. And now bishop to d4 was played, a rather annoying move, because if I was given a move, let's say something like this was played, then bishop to f6 might be an idea if it wasn't leading to the loss of a pawn. So I always have these sort of ideas. For example, queen e5, now bishop d4 doesn't work because queen takes 4. And if this doesn't work, well, then it's very dangerous. Let's say just rook to e2, and here we already win material by taking here, and white is going to be checkmated here. The queen is pinned, and it's really not visible how white is going to survive this without losing too much material. So bishop to d4 played, and when the bishop on e3 left the diagonal, went to d4, then this diagonal became weak, so we just occupy it and we threaten to advance our pawn, the e-pawn. Therefore came king to b, king to b1, trying to get out of the diagonal. So now pawn e3 was still played, the knight goes to f3, and of course I wanted to keep my pair of bishops, played bishop f4, now queen to f5, attacking the bishop, and here I was a little bit low on time. Played bishop e6, queen to queen to e4, and rook back to f8 with very clear intentions of just going a bishop f5 and pinning the queen to the king and winning the piece then. King a1 was played, and I regretted my next move because I didn't play bishop b3. I saw this move, but somehow I thought I would lose the central passed pawn, and why I asked myself why to play like this. Maybe I can get even more out of this than just the exchange for a pawn, which was too optimistic, I believe. So bishop f5 played, a queen a d5 check, and because I was low on time and I was getting 30 seconds for every move, and then an additional 15 moves for reaching move 40, I decided to repeat the position here and then go king h7. So I managed to play an additional move, gain 30 seconds or 1 minute, and then coming closer to the 40 moves or the 40th move to gain some time. Knight to h4 was played, and in horrible time pressure here, I decided to go rook d6, which I regretted again because bishop c2 just looks so super strong. The rook is controlling f5. This rook must move somewhere, wherever. And now this looks very, very dangerous for the white player here. And obviously taking here is met by rook to d8. And we have a very interesting position because it looks like that white can win material. So bishop takes f4, queen takes f4, but the rook on d8 can be taken. At least it looks like it can be taken, but it cannot because there's always queen takes a4 mate. So I like this idea more. After I played my move here, rook d6, I really regretted playing this move. So queen to f3, and this looks like a clever attempt of pinning one of my bishops along the f file because my rook on f8 is undefended. So bishop to c2 played. Now rook to c1. I moved my bishop to d3 and g3, and it looks like white is winning a piece. However, again, there's queen c4, and queen c4 saves the day. White really needs to play bishop c5, I believe, because after queen takes a4, it's not mate. Here's bishop a3, and didn't lose on the spot, so at least he survived. He is not mated yet. Bishop to e4 attacks the queen and reaches move 40. Or, this is just playing move 40. And here I gained 15 minutes and really took my time to figure out if there's any threat. I couldn't see anything, so I took on h1 after thinking for a long time. Then followed rook takes h1 and rook f to d8. My intention is very, very clear. I just want to check and exchange everything. After the exchange of the queens, it would be very clear that a black is completely winning because black is an exchange up here. And also a passed pawn on e3 up. Knight to f5, a desperate attempt to reach anything, but this is met by by rook d8 check, rook d1 check, sorry. And here, whatever white does, white is really lost. So if the rook takes, then simply queen takes, exchanging material here just leads to an additional queen for black. And also trying to be clever and not taking the rook by means of playing king to a2 is very dangerous because now white is still threatening mate on g7. And this was the intention of knight f5, threatening mate. However, black can win this by just checking now. So there's no need of being frightened of the mate on g7. So queen c4 check, pawn b3, and now we just check with the second rook. The bishop must go in between, and this position is utterly lost because black just takes, a very typical idea, and here checks with the rook. Wherever the king goes, the next move will be a check. King goes to b1, queen takes b3 check, and mate on b2. And also if the king goes to c1 or a1, exactly the same idea, and again mate on b2. What if the king goes up? Well, this is also a funny position because queen c5 check, and now after queen a4 we have rook a2 mate. Very unpleasant. So this is nothing you want to have here with white. And also b4 is leading to a forced mate because king a4 and queen takes b4 mate. Let's go back. Here in the game, white decided to take with the rook immediately, and then I took with the queen. I would just want to get rid of the queens, understandably. Then I take with my rook with check, and now play pawn to e2. My opponent just realized that this is now completely lost. There's no way of me going wrong, and decided to resign here. So in this game, you saw a couple of things. The fight for the center was so tense and important, and white just gave up on it too early. Focus on fighting for the center, not only in the beginning of the game, not only in the opening, but also in the middle game. It's just such an important place because your pieces there will be very mobile, as you saw in the game. I could attack basically on both wings if I wished to do that. I hope you enjoyed the game. If you are looking for a chess coach, feel free to write me. You can find the link to my coaching in the description below. If you liked the video, feel free to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.